Corporate sponsorship for this webinar is provided by the Local Government Federal Credit Union, a member-owned, not-for-profit financial cooperative. The credit union provides affordable financial services to all local government employees, volunteers, and their families in North Carolina. Member benefits include lower loan rates, higher interest rates on deposits, and a nominal fee structure. Financial services include mortgage, vehicle, and personal loans, savings, checking, money market, IRA, and term certificate deposit accounts, online banking and telephone access to accounts, in addition to many other services and features. For more information, visit lgfcu.org or call 800-344-4846. Welcome everyone to this traffic safety webinar sponsored by the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program. This is one in a series of webinars addressing topics of interest for traffic safety professionals. The series is co-hosted by the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University and the University of North Carolina Highway Safety Research Center. Today's topic is North Carolina mobility and crash characteristics during the COVID-19 pandemic, presented by Randa Radwan and Srinivasan with the UNC Highway Safety Research Center. Dr. Radwan joined the HSRC as its director in 2018. She has over 25 years of experience in transportation safety and vehicle crashworthiness research, including vehicle safety performance and advanced technologies, and fostering international partnerships with automakers, safety regulators, and other researchers. Dr. Radwan is a transportation safety engineer and previously served as a research program manager at the US DOT's National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and as director of advanced research and a senior research scientist at George Washington University's National Crash Analysis Center. Dr. Srinivasan is a senior transportation research engineer at the HSRC. His areas of interest include traffic engineering and safety, human factors, and the application of statistics and econometric methods. Dr. Srinivasan has more than 20 years of experience conducting research for federal agencies, including the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, Federal Highway Administration, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and the state departments of transportation, including Virginia, New Jersey, New York, California, and North Carolina. Dr. Radwan, if you would please share your screen now to begin your presentation.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the opportunity to present our work. So before I get going, I'd like to acknowledge the HSRC team members who contributed to this work, Dr. Raghavan Srinivasan, Dr. Bolan, and Dr. Wes Comfort. So this work is part of a study on COVID-19 mobility and health impacts in North Carolina, which ended in December and was funded by the North Carolina Collaboratory at UNC. And however, we have continued to do some work on our own. Now, the motivation for that study was to investigate interrelationships amongst public health policies, mobility changes, traffic safety, which is the focus of this webinar, and the transmission impacts of COVID-19. And the idea was we're hoping that our insights and results can help inform policy decisions in North Carolina within the current pandemic and any future disruptions that related to mobility.
Rhonda, if you would pardon the interruption, did you want to turn your video camera on during your presentation?
Sure, I'm happy to do so.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, sorry about that. Okay. All right, I'd like to start with some mobility trends, and I'm aware that most of you are aware of or have seen this. But before we get going, just to remind you of some important dates that are pertinent to the study. And what I'm presenting here is some executive orders that were issued in North Carolina in response to the pandemic, and would like to focus your attentions on the ones highlighted in red. So in March 10, our Governor Roy Cooper declared a state of emergency March 27, 2020, it was the statewide stay-at-home order. And as we got through May and through September, there was revision of these restrictions. Now, with that in mind, what I'm presenting here is trends of ATR, which most of you may know that this is automatic traffic reporter stations. And these counts are primarily used to capture the volume of traffic in a set on a roadway over a given time period. So they represent traffic volume. What's the time frame is January 1st through September 2020, and this is a rolling 7-day average. And on the left side, comparing the trends in 2019, 2020. And as you see, right soon after the state of emergency declaration, we had a substantial decrease in the traffic volume in 2020. And we recovered late June, early summer, but not fully. Now, on the right side, these trends are broken down by rurality. And so urban, suburban, rural counties. And it's important to let you know how we use that designation. So this was based on the North Carolina Rural Classification System, where the way it was divided is by average population density. So for rural counties, we have 80 of those with fewer of 250 people per square mile. For suburban, we had 14 of those with an average population density between 250 and 750, and over 750 was suburban counties, and we have 6 of those. Now, the green line, which is the trend for urban, the urban counties, we see a substantial drop, quite substantial, close to 60% right after the order, and then recovery, but not to still stayed within 15% of the pre-state of emergency order. Now, there wasn't as much of a relative drop in suburban and rural counties. However, what's interesting is that the traffic volume pretty much recovered in the suburban counties. While it recovered in rural, actually it increased. So keeping that in mind. Now, when you see these substantial drops in traffic volume, you would expect in decreasing crashes and correspondingly injuries and fatalities. So this study tried to, we investigated these questions. I'd like to start by discussing data source approach and time period. Our goal is to examine the characteristics of the crashes before and during the pandemic over the time period from March 10 to August 31st. Our data source was the North Carolina data provided by NCDOT, and the data set was provided in November 2020. We used logistic regression and trend analysis to look at crash-based data files. Now, it's a crash-based analysis, but we did link with the vehicle and people files. Now, what I'm going to be presenting today is these variables whose association to crash severity was statistically significant when we conducted the logistic regression modeling. So association to crash severity. Crash severity here is as reported by the police officer. So all of these are based on the judgment of the reporting police officer. So we have 5 levels: K for killed, A for suspected serious or serious injuries, B minor, C possible, O no injury. On the right side of the screen, I have a bit of detail on the different variables used, and one of the reasons behind that is to allow other analysts, if they would like to replicate our work, to go ahead and do so. So the first variable, number of vehicles involved, we looked at both single vehicle crashes and multi-vehicle crashes, 2 or more. We did not restrict to more, so there could be in these crashes multiple vehicles involved. Accident type, whether you hit an animal, backing, hit a moving object, another parked vehicle, fixed object, rollover, run off the road, etc. Locality, now this locality, although you see the urban, rural, and mixed designation, it's not the same as what we had used earlier in the crash file. This is based on development. So an urban area is noted if it has more than 70% developed, rural is under 30, and in between is mixed. In terms of road class, interstate, NC state highway, secondary roads, US highway, and local roads. Speeding. Now, our speeding, the way we define speeding in our study is if it, as reported by the police officer, if that crash exceeded safe speed for conditions or exceeded the authorized speed limit. So that was a definition for that. Belt use was belted, unbelted. We combined impaired driving for alcohol and drug use. The accident maximum speed limit and the speed limit, all of these are what was noted down by the police officers, so they're estimates. And then lighting condition, dark versus lighted, not unlighted, dawn, daylight, weekend, weekday, and accident time. Just briefly, I just wanted to share some statistics from Logistic Regression, and basically the p-values in this column is for 2000, these variables in 2019, and this is 2020, and in a significance level of 0.05 or less is what we're looking at. And as you see, all of them pretty much are significant. There was just a couple, the single versus multiple vehicle, and it's going to be interesting. I'm going to share some data that might explain why in 2020 the number of vehicles was not well as indicator or associated with severity. Now with that, I want to move on to results. So on the right side, that's a traffic count. On the left is percentages of crashes and how they relate. So looking at this table, the first row is serious fatal crashes in 2019, 2020. And you see the actual number is almost the same. And we know we had a substantial drop in traffic volume. Now, the relative percentage of fatal and serious or severe crashes increased per total from 2% to 2.6%. And in terms of the no injury crashes, they actually decreased by close to 23%. Now, if we look at a further breakdown, what's by severity, what's fascinating here is that the numbers killed, the actual numbers, had increased by 13%, by 85 fatal crashes. Now, while the no injury and possible injuries decreased to the similar levels as the total crashes, we see that the serious injuries were reduced by a shorter amount. So this prompted us to try to understand, like, why did that happen? You know, what are the crash conditions, characteristics? And this is what I'm hoping to shed some light on today. Now, in these graphs, looking at locality and road class, and the color scheme throughout the webinar is the same. So this is a distribution adding to 100% across the year, and whether it's total crashes or serious injury crash, serious and fatal injury crashes. So gray is going to be 2020, always 2019 total crashes, and yellow is going to be 2020 total crashes. Blue will be serious and fatal crashes 2019, and 220 and orange will be the serious and fatal crashes in 2020. But I'd like to point to some things that are in general what we know about crashes. So rural crashes, so the exposure part is basically total number of crashes are the gray and yellow or dark yellow. So although these crashes in both years make up a smaller amount of the total percentage-wise, they contribute to a much higher level of amount for severe fatal crashes. So they are higher, they're more injurious type of crashes. And so that doesn't change from year to year. But what we see is a slight increase in the severity, percentage of severity in 2020 for the mixed and urban. So there's been a reduction in actual traffic in urban, crashes, which follows the volume, and that makes sense. Now, taking a look at what type of roads we're on, and you can associate plurality with the roads as well. We're going to talk about that a little later. So on local roads, where there's been a relative reduction in the total number of crashes, there's been an increase in serious and fatal crashes on local roads. Similarly, on secondary roads. Moving on to looking at the actual number of vehicles and accident type. So on the right, we're looking at the accident type. And again, similar general conclusions. For example, run-off-the-road accidents or impacts with fixed objects, in terms of, they are more injurious. So while they make up a smaller amount of the overall crash population, because as you know, all these bars add up to 100%, they contribute or are associated with a higher number of severe and fatal crashes. Now, the observation here is that if you look at the first two accident types, so we have an increase in crashes and increase in severity. An increase in crash and severity. So not only, so these are contributing to that 2.6% increase of serious injuries. Now, rear end is always, it's due to lower speed and less injuries, so we've had less of them and correspondingly less severity. Now, I want to move a little bit towards variables associated with more of the behavioral driver behavior. Although we did not analyze the people's fire, but these are variables are noted on the accident level as well. So in the first table, looking at speeding versus not speeding, and anything in blue is going to be 2020 and black is going to be 2019. So it's not surprising that speeding is not the large block of our data. It's about 5%, although they contribute, their speeding causes higher percentages of serious and fatal injuries. So that's something that we know. But what's interesting here is that there is an increase, about 3% of the total crashes of people actually speeding. And, you know, it may not be surprising. I mean, you know, we have less congestion and less people on the road. So that's kind of something that's not very surprising. We have a slight increase in the percentage from 18.5 to 19.3 of the percentage of serious and fatal injuries. Next, I'd like to talk about the drivers involved, and there could be more than one driver killed in these crashes. If they were belted or unbelted. And what's interesting here is that there was more people were unbelted, and that did contribute. They were more people who were unbelted who got seriously hurt. The last thing I'd like to look at here is alcohol impairment. And as what's interesting here is that, again, you know, it makes up a small percentage of the total crashes, but it leads to more injurious crashes. And we know that that's a trend that's understood. So there's been a slight increase of impaired driver involved in overall crashes. And but what's interesting, it didn't translate to an increase, a relative increase of serious and fatal crashes. With that, I'd like to take a closer look at speed and what that meant for us, given that we do understand that there was less congestion, which led to more speeding. On the left side is the crash distribution. Again, everything adds up to 100. And one thing I should have noted, the serious injury trends here, we can compare 2019, 2020, even across percentages, because they were basically the same number, 2,661 versus 2,663. So it's almost looking at the actual numbers, not just percentages of total. What's interesting here, and again, we take a look at an overall, the distribution when you're at the higher speeds, you tend to have more serious injuries. And so basically, but this is the block that's most interesting. Speed limits of 51 to 60 seem to be more injurious than even higher. But What to note here is that there's been an increase in the serious injuries over the 51 to 60 speed limit and 30 to 40. Now, when we take a look at the maximum speed, as noted by the police officer, what's interesting, I'd like to highlight these two blocks here. So we had what I would call, an actual, not just a slight, but definitely an increase in severe crashes in maximum speed noted to be 61 and higher. And there were quite a few in the 100 miles. This is a grouping. So these were all groups. So it's interesting to see that there were like ones with at much higher speed. But there's a slight increase at the 51 to 60. And of course, if that increase corresponds to these decreases. And interestingly, there's severity increase at the lower speeds. That I think moving on, it is the vehicle-to-vehicle crashes, the head-on and the opposite direction, I think, are related to that. Now, moving on, I would like to just to focus more on speeding versus not speeding. So all the next series of plot are going to look at speeding-related crashes and look at the trends in terms of the characteristics of speeding versus non-speeding crashes over this time period. And the common thread is that there's a reduction in non-speeding, but the speeding pretty much stayed level. We know, it's difficult this is a much smaller scale, and we know that there's been an increase, as noted, but slight increase, but not the substantial decrease. So the non-speeding related crashes decreased over this time period. However, when we look at the serious injury crashes and fatal, so severe and fatal crashes, because we're working with a crash level, speeding related versus non-speeding related, we didn't have as much change. So we did not have a drop in those proportions, which is in line with the overall data set characteristics. Now, this is looking at speeding versus non-speeding crashes for single vehicles over the same time period. And I'm going to toggle between two screens. This is single vehicle non-speeding, and this is multi-vehicles non-speeding. So the single vehicle crashes stayed pretty much at the same level. And I should have added that these are weekly crashes to allow us to look at a trend. And so what's interesting is that the number of single vehicle crashes pretty much stayed level, but the V2V crashes decreased and followed the drop in traffic volume. Now, next, I'd like to show you the speeding related crash trends for light condition. And the non-speeding for dark, whether lit or not lit, decreased some. But what's interesting is the daylight crashes decreased, which is, you probably are seeing a trend going. So people who go out during the day stayed home, and people who were maybe going out late at night didn't stay at home as much. So this is kind of an underlying insight that we're seeing. With that, I think I'd like to get to the week, day, and time of day kind of comparison. And the big thing to note here is that increase in both exposure and a number of crashes and severe and fatal crashes at night, in the evening at night. So that increased in 2020. There was a slight increase during the what we'd call a typical rush hour, but we know there's less congestion and can be. And the reduction is interesting here. Although there was a slight increase in terms of the number of total crashes, but there's decrease in severity. So this goes along with our general insight. Now, light condition, we saw a little bit of that when looking at the non-speeding data. And and it also goes along with the time of day analysis. So in the dark, not lighted or unknown lighting, that's where we see the increase, and also in the dark lighted roadway in fatal and severe crashes. Now, I want to get back and revisit the fatal crashes, which is, disheartening. I'd like to say that typically when looking at fatal crashes, we compare over multiple years. And so this is just a snapshot comparing to last year. We picked it as a baseline. I would rather, if we had several years of data that we can compare to an average or a trend. But taking a look at here is we had an increase of 85 fatal crashes. So we wanted to take a closer look at that. What characterized these 85 crashes? What was different about these 85 crashes? So, and here I just wanted to highlight the important point that our distributions across the years have not changed that much. I mean, the characterization of the crash problem. With that caveat, taking a closer look. So comparing 2019 fatalities, fatal crashes, and 2020 fatal crashes over the time period of the study, which is March 10 to August 31st. Of those 85 fatal crashes, 48 were on rural roads, 29 were on urban roads. 60 of the 85 fatal crashes occurred in two-way undivided roads. 28 were on secondary roads, 24 on local. 33 were opposite direction head on collision, 20 were fixed. 34 had a max speed of 50 to 60 miles per hour as reported by police officers. And 50 were on roads with 41 to 50 miles per hour speed limits. 64 occurred on dry road condition, and that's not atypical. Typically, most crashes occur in dry conditions. But what's interesting here is 70 were in multi-vehicle crashes. I thought that was unexpected. And so 64 of these crashes had at least one driver in a 20 to 39 age group. There were 87 more male drivers involved in the 2020 fatal crashes, but 10 less female. 83 did not involve impaired driving, 67 did not involve, of the fatal crashes, did not involve speeding, but 58 involved unbelted occupants. 53 occurred on weekdays, 32 on weekend, 47 occurred in evening hours, and 30 occurred in what we term rush hours. So, if we look at a profile, rural is highlighted by the blue, and I will come back to it in a bit. Now, moving on to general observations, and to give us time also for discussion and Q&A. So with a substantial drop in traffic volumes in 2020 up to 2019 during the pandemic, there was a corresponding decrease in the total number of crashes, 22% in the period of study. There was a corresponding decrease of 23 in minor non-injury, but there was only a 4% decrease in serious injury crashes and an increase of 13% in fatal crashes. When we take a closer look in summary of all the different figures and tables we've looked at, the distributions were primarily consistent with the following differences. So 26% of all crashes were severe to fatal in 2020, and versus 2% in 2010 over the period March 10 to August 31st. There was an increase on local and secondary roads and a slight increase in urban areas. There's an increase in fixed objects and run-off-the-road severe and fatal crashes. There's a slight increase in speeding crashes, but there was an increase in 61 plus mile crashes and slight increase in crashes with max speeds 51 to 60 miles per hour. There was an increase in unbelted drivers and a slight decrease in impaired drivers. Now, the observations from our look at the trends in speeding related crashes. So while there was a small increase in speeding related crashes, there was a substantial decrease in non-speeding crashes. both severe and fatal speeding and non-speeding crashes remain consistent. It can change as much. That whoever was on the roads at that times last year were still out, that with the characteristics were still out this past year. We're in 2021. There was a substantial reduction in non-speeding multi-vehicle crashes, while the non-speeding fixed object single vehicle crashes remained consistent. There's a missing word here, single vehicle crashes. There was a substantial reduction in non-speeding crashes occurring in the daylight, but less so in dark conditions. Now moving on to the fatal crash increase. So if we wanted to take just a quick look of the general profile of the fatal crashes increase in 2020, it would be a multi-vehicle crash on a two-way undivided rural road with 41 to 50 miles per hour speed limit, perhaps an opposite direction or a head-on and or a fixed object or runner of the road crash. Typically, it would be have 20 to 39-year-old male drivers who were unbelted, not speeding and not impaired. It was on a weekday in the evening, at night or at night. And with that, these are our observations. Now, where do we go from here? This study, we actually linked driver characteristics from the vehicle and people data with the crash data. But it was a crash level analysis. A closer look and doing an analysis of the vehicle and people level, which is more extensive, should give us some more insight. And what we would hope to find from that is a better understanding about the contributing factors of the drivers, such as age, gender, alcohol, and other driver-related factors. And it would be helpful if we can analyze the speech data to see if there were patterns over time. Because what we noticed also that I hadn't had a chance to mention is that in 2019, there was an increase in speed early in the year. So we need to understand that, 2020. So to do that, we need to have data linkages from the speed data, roadway data, and crash data to look at kind of a before and after analysis. But it's a little difficult to obtain and download the speed data, and there are difficulties associated with the crash and linking with linkages as with the different files. As most analysts know, that's typically a challenging task. Now, with that, I'd like to move on to discussions and implications and QA, but I'd like to start with my colleague, Srini. So Dr. Srinivasan, what do you think about any additional insight when taking a closer look at the speed data? And with that, I will stop sharing and
yeah, I think this speed data piece, I think, will be very interesting because we have not had access to the type of speed data that is available now from INRIX and here, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, at least, I think. So that will be a unique opportunity if we can link the crash data with the roadway and the with the speed data. We actually attempted that for some time in this project, but we had to kind of backtrack because there are 2 sources of speed data that we were given access to, and we used the first one, which we had some problems linking, but the second one we could link, but it was kind of late in the game for us to be able to do much work at the time. So I think that'll provide some value, I think, because it's a data set that we haven't really done much with in the past.
Thank you, Srini. I see one comment in the task from Bill Hunter about commenting on the change in pet and bike crashes. So that is a great question. I will go back a slide and share that. But ideally, there was less crashes associated with this group, but more severity as well. So whether it's being struck, but people going faster, something to investigate. And I can, let me just go back and to the slides and make sure I'm sharing the right. Okay, so let's go back. Here. So although, so this is the crash exposure. This is not as a, I was looking at the fatalities. So there has been a reduction, a slight reduction here. That's what I would say. But there's in terms of, I think the fatalities, they were higher.
Randa, I think I was able to pull up some of the numbers that Bo had extracted on the. There is, if you look at the accident type variable for pedocyclists and pedestrian crashes,
Yes.
there are about 1,100 in 2019 and about 856 in 2020. And then if you look at this KA proportion, about 22% of those crashes were KA crashes in 2019. In 2020, they're about 27%.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. That's absolutely, and that's like a 5% increase. I noticed that, but I would like to spend a bit more time to understand that. But I think they're all interrelated. You know, the speed factor is interrelated.
Now, there's also one other comment, I think, from Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
In the I think it's in the chat.
All right. So Tracy says, seems like there may be a correlation between those that take risks on the road, driving or riding unbelted, and those who take health risks, continue to travel. So Tracy, this is our, like, this is my takeaway impression, but we need a bit more data to relate the both. Now, I will share that our mobility indices correlated well with number of cases, COVID cases, and deaths. So this would be the I would agree with you, but we need to model it to give that confidence. Srini, would you like to add anything?
No, not really.
Thank you.
I think one other question from Joe Hammer.
See, Joe.
In Q&A, Joe is asking, did authorities around North Carolina continue to enforce seatbelt laws with the same vigor in 2020 as compared to previous years? And also, what do we know about seatbelt usage rates in 2020?
You know, Joe, I would like to send it back to the folks at, you know, at DMV and NCDOT, but I would say, I mean, my gut tells me a couple things. That, you know, maybe that we had less enforcement in general, because maybe, you know, our officers were reluctant to have that contact. And also with turmoil, basically, regarding the racial injustices, I think maybe affected that too as well. And I would like to ask if any of our colleagues are from NCDOT or DMV who are on the webinar would like to add something to that.
Just want a reminder, you can use both Q&A to type in questions or comments, or if you'd like to speak, just simply raise your hand and I'll activate your microphone. And while we're waiting, Rhonda and Srini, Tracy has posted some information in the chat for everyone related to bicycle and pedestrian travel during the pandemic. We actually have another webinar upcoming on that particular topic on June 15th. Tracy has posted the link to the webinar registration for that. Again, that's in chat.
Thank you, Tracy. Definitely an important part of our traffic problem. So can I just send the question back to our audience? Is there anything else you would like to know about this situation? And also, what do you think the implications are? I can't believe we answered everybody's question. Okay, Regine, thank you for that opportunity for inviting us to speak. I would
actually
say,
one more question.
oh,
Randa.
there's one more question.
Yes, thank you, Srini. Again, this is in Q&A. The question is, and a comment, the question, could underreporting be an issue? Since we had less volume on the road, is it possible that crash reporting system had less load and it was able to capture and report more fatal and severe crashes as compared to previous years?
Well, we have Daniel Carter from NCDOT on the webinar. Daniel, do you want to? I don't think so, but Daniel, do you have a perspective on that?
Daniel, if you would raise your hand, I will activate your microphone.
We have somebody's hand is raised.
All right, Daniel, actually, go ahead, Daniel, and then we've got M.W. Johnson would like to speak as well. Daniel, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the question was about the underreporting and whether just sort of from the source, or are we sort of just getting less data on maybe certain kinds of crashes or crashes in certain areas. I think it's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that. That's something that I think would be interesting. I'd toss into the mix of things that Randa and crew might look at, kind of moving forward with the study. I think that would be a very interesting one.
Thank you, Daniel, for that.
Thank you, Daniel. M.W. Johnson, you had your hand raised. If you'd like to unmute and ask your question or make a comment. Okay, maybe that was an inadvertent. Oh, there you go. Go ahead. M.W. Johnson, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Okay. We have another comment in the Q&A, Rhonda. This is again from Joe Hummer, who's with NCDOT. Joe writes, my theory is that more risk-taking drivers stayed on the road in 2020 and more risk-averse drivers stayed home. This would be reflected in seat belts and speeding. This could be studied with induced exposure methods.
Joe, we share the same theory, and would love to continue this analysis, especially because there's a lot of people are trying to answer this question, and it's important for us to understand that. So for me, that would be kind of almost the next thing to do with this, with all this.
There's also a question. There's also a comment from Tracy in the chat.
I don't actually, Tracy, I alluded to that a little bit, given the the world we live in and the reality of the social injustice, and it's been brought forth. Maybe some police officers are a little less reluctant, and I wouldn't agree. This is my gut, but again, we need to support this with data.
And the panelists are the only ones that can see that question, so I'm not sure if you wanted to.
Oh my goodness, let me go ahead and read it. So Tracy says, not sure if we should ask this live, but I also wonder how the police-public relationships may have affected enforcement last year. With the pandemic and protests, were law enforcement officers less likely to pull people over who may have been driving dangerously? And my kind of thinking is that yes, but we need to find, we need to support this with data. And
Rhonda, thank you. We have a A question or comment from Sahid Hassan, if I've pronounced your name correctly. Go ahead. You're and unmute. And
It's Sajid Hassan. Sorry.
Sajid, sorry, Sajid.
I had a question regarding, because during the pandemic, a lot of our coordination plans for traffic signals had to be revised because of the amount of traffic. We had rush hour plans for not that much traffic. So I wanted to know, was there any effect regarding, was there any change when crashes occurred at traffic signals and traffic signal operations, where people were and when signal operations were changed, were there any changes there that caused any changes in crash rates or something like that?
Well, this goes to, when Daniel said, maybe something next we look at, that would also be, we would need to look at those operations and then kind of do an association with different mapping, but to see if that made a difference. But I mean, the overall premise of when you have less congestions on the road, people are gonna drive faster. And, of course, that leads to the overall thinking that maybe some of our roads are designed for a higher speed limit than they should be, But I that's a great question. And that could be posed, would have to be coordinated with DMV to see if those operation changes were made. And we can look at the data to see if we can see a linkage with that.
Thanks.
There's one other question in the question and answer.
Yes, Srini, thank you. Yes, the question in Q&A is, were you also able to capture common reasons the drivers felt were the reason for the crash from their point of view? I understand not all crash reports give this information, but I'm wondering if anything stood out at all.
Well, that our analysis was done on the crash level. So we did not dig deep into the people's file where there may be some insight towards this contributing factor. But typically overall, the driver is not interviewed and asked for their perspective. It is the police officer who decides, and there's certain set of variables and coded that they check off. I hope that helped, Derek. Oh, Eugene, you wanted to answer this question. Please go ahead.
Oh, no, I just checked it as it was answered live.
Okay.
Sorry for that. Joe, another comment, and Derek, feel free to follow up if you have any other questions or comments with regard to that. Another comment in Q&A from Joe Hummer. One other thought is that the authorities did a really poor job conveying relative risks. We scared people out of the relatively safe mode, such as planes, trains, and buses, into the riskiest mode of driving.
Oh, Joe, you're preaching to the choir. We, as a safety community, need to make that more aware. I usually start my talk, if I'm talking overview, is that if the president of Ford, and actually it was told to me by the senior person at Ford one time, that if there was, if one of the aviation companies had 100 people down, a plane down every day, they would, put that plane at rest. They will no longer allow the plane to be flying. So this is kind of, if you want to compare the kind of the level of safety problem, if you're comparing aviation versus on the road risks.
Thank you for those questions and comments so far. And we have another question in Q&A. Brian Wall writes, where are the occurrence times of serious crashes, or what are the occurrence times during the pandemic? Oh, sorry. Now it's were the occurrence times of serious crashes during the pandemic similar to the times prior? Thank you, Brian.
So serious, I mean, there's a dark at night, and tend to have more You can, and you know, sometimes weekends over weekdays. It's just that during the pandemic, there was a relatively more of those. This is what we tried to compare. So there were relatively more crashes in the dark, serious fatal crashes in the dark at night than in 2020, relative to 2019 during the same time. I hope that that answered the question.
Thank you, friend, again for those questions. We do have a few more minutes, about 3 minutes left. So certainly feel free to raise your hand, type some additional questions into the, or comments into the Q&A.
So Eugene, I would offer folks can feel free to email Srini or myself, or actually any of the other members of our team, who, if you have any questions at a later time.
Rhonda, thank you for that. And then the follow-up email that everyone will receive will include your and Srini's email addresses, so folks can contact you directly for any additional follow-up. Okay, well, seeing no more questions, Rhonda and Srini, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for our closing remarks. And again, I want to thank you both for your great presentation. And I also want to thank everyone who joined us today for your time and your questions and comments. They were terrific. Again, if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A as we're wrapping up. Or you can follow up with Rhonda and Srini directly by email. Also use Q&A to share any suggestions you would like to help us improve this webinar series, including any future topics you'd like to learn about. Following today's webinar, as I mentioned earlier, you'll receive an email with the recording link. So feel free, so please watch for that email. That email will also include a link so that you can request a webinar participation certificate. And if you would like to receive a certificate, just use the link in that email to submit that request. A note that only attendees of today's live webinar may receive the certificate. We're unable to award them if you happen to be watching this recording right now. Professional engineers may also earn 1 PDH for participating in today's webinar. So if you are a PE, be sure not only to request the certificate, but to also complete your NC Bells evaluation using a separate link that's provided in that same follow-up email. We invite you to join us again for other traffic safety webinars that are planned for this series, including the one that Tracy mentioned in chat earlier. That'll be on bicycle and pandemic impacts during the, bicycle and pedestrian impacts during the pandemic on June 15th. So please visit the Traffic Safety Conference website. At the link shown on your screen, you'll get a list of all of our upcoming webinars. At that same website, you'll find information about the North Carolina Traffic Safety Conference and Expo. We weren't unable to have it this year due to COVID concerns, but we are definitely having it next year. So we hope you'll plan to attend the conference next August, and we invite you to propose topics for presentation. Just follow the link for the presentation proposals on this same website to submit your ideas. So thank you for thank you for participating in today's webinar. And until next time, goodbye for now. Corporate sponsorship for this webinar is provided by the Local Government Federal Credit Union, a member-owned, not-for-profit financial cooperative. The credit union provides affordable financial services to all local government employees, volunteers, and their families in North Carolina. Member benefits include lower loan rates, higher interest rates on deposits, and a nominal fee structure. Financial services include mortgage, vehicle, and personal loans, savings, checking, money market, IRA, and term certificate deposit accounts, online banking, and telephone access to accounts, in addition to many other services and features. For more information, visit lgfcu.org or call 800-344-4846.